Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Volvo Guy channel. Today I wanted to talk about the common problems on the four-cylinder engines that was made by Volvo. It started in 2015. They start putting these in the XC60s and some of the S60s and so on until pretty much today. They all use all four-cylinder engines. They have made some improvement on the engines, and most of these problems are on the early model engines. Most of these problems has been repaired and taken care of later on in the years. So most of this would include 2015, 16, and a little bit of 17s, and 18s and on. Most of the major problems were all taken care of. But on today's video, I'm going to discuss some of the problems that I have seen. And number one on the list, some of you might expect, the oil consumption problem, which is on the 2015 and 16s for sure. They had this problem. For some reason, I don't know why, Volvo have decided to use the same piston rings issue they had on the five-cylinder engine previously. And they use the same rings on the 15s and the 16s of those engines, in which same exact problem. On the 2017s, they have went back to the new design rings, and as far as I know, I have not seen any problems on the 2017s and on in terms of oil consumption. They don't do that. And also, the Volvo's been doing the 10,000 mile service, which I personally do not recommend. But we haven't seen this problem on the 2017s and newer engines, which has been updated and got the new pistons installed in them. So you won't have to worry about this problem if it's a 17 or newer engines. They already have the good pistons, but 15s and 16s, they definitely had quite a bit of problems with those engines in terms of oil consumption. And that was probably the worst problem you could run into if the oil consumption becomes very high. So you're putting 1 or 2 quarts every 1,000 miles. That's a lot of oil. Now, the second problem that I have run into quite often, and this one I believe it did move on past the 17 model years, and this is only on the T6 models. Now, when I say T6, Volvo has used the same four-cylinder engine on the T5, T6, and T8s. The only difference between the T6 and the T5, it's only turbocharged. T6 would be turbocharged and supercharged, and the T8 would be the same engine, turbocharged, supercharged, and also the electric motor. And that's what they did, is they used the engine output to determine whether it's a T5, T6, or T8. Previously, T5 would have meant 5-cylinder turbo, T6 would have been 6-cylinder turbo, and T8 would be the V8 engine. But what they did is, whatever the output is, they matched that to the numbers. So T5 would be the lower output, T6 would be mid-range, and T8 would be the higher output, including the four-cylinder engine and also the hybrid motor or the electric motor in the back. So on the T6 models only, where you have a supercharger and a turbocharger, we've ran into a problem with the supercharger seals. I have seen some supercharger failures, but the most common I have seen is the seals. They fail and they cause vacuum leaks, and then you get the engine code for running too lean. You get a check engine light, and when you check the codes, it has a lean code, and that was due to the supercharger leak. Now, the having a lean code problem, there's other things caused it, but one of the most common was the supercharger, which is, I'm going to get into other things that would also cause a lean code. But the supercharger leaks, that was another major issue that I've run into many times, and something to be aware of. When this happens, the supercharger have to be removed and then dismantled, and all the seals and gaskets would have to be replaced and then put back in the vehicle, and that's a lot of time consuming job. So roughly 8 to 10 hours to remove the supercharger, replace all the seals, and put it back in. So it could get costly depending on the shop. Some shops charge 8 hours, some 10, some 12, depending on where you go. and that would be the second problem that I have seen with those engines. The third problem I have seen is fuel injectors. On those four-cylinder engines, they have went to direct injection, and for some reason those injectors had a problem where they do not push enough fuel. I don't know if they get restricted or something goes wrong with them, but you end up getting misfire codes due to fuel injectors, and we have to replace quite a bit of those. And those, I have seen them on 15s, 16s, and also 17s. I don't think I have seen 18s yet with this problem, but 15s, 16s, and 17s had this fuel injector issues. And in some cases, you will have a misfire code and a lean code. It wasn't pushing enough fuel in the engine, you would get a misfire and a lean code as well. And that was one of the other issues with lean code, was also related to fuel injectors. Normally, if that's the case, you would have a misfire, also a lean code. And in some cases, that would repair both issues. The fourth on the list would be O2 sensors. The front O2 sensors would have either a slow response check engine light code, or you would get a fake lean code. The O2 sensor would be very slow to response after the throttle body closing, and it would spike the fuel trims and causes the engine control module to think that there is a lean code. And due to that slow response, we have to replace those O2 sensors. We have ran into some drivability issue, and the way the engine runs, it was hesitate, shake a little bit, and it was due to front O2 sensors. I lost count of how many I had to do, or how many I have encountered with bad front O2 sensors, between fake lean codes and running issues and codes for O2 sensor slow response. There was quite often it happens. I would say a lot of people who drives these vehicles or own them or work on them have probably seen those come in with O2 codes or lean codes. This is a very, very common problem. Now, the fifth problem on my list here, I decided to put it in here, was the low side fuel pressure sensor. As I mentioned, they changed those engines to direct injection, and for that they had to add another fuel pump for high pressure, and also they had to add another fuel pressure sensor for the high side. Now, for the low side, they also had to keep that pressure sensor as well to measure and to read the low side pressure on the fuel, and then there's another one for the high side. Now, the low side, for some reason, they used not so good sensors. I have put a picture up here to show the old sensor and the new sensor, and that old sensor was really bad, and we had to replace them with the new style sensor, and also the fuel line had to be replaced along with the sensor. And we used to get a lot of fault codes for this particular fuel pressure sensor, and that was another common problem. Now, on the later engines, this problem was already taken care of, and the new engines comes with the new sensor in them already. But if you drive a 15, a 16, and some of the 17s, they might already have this old sensor, and it's very simple to replace. It's not that hard. It's a quick replacement. You can get a new sensor from the dealer with a line. Everything is under the hood. Quick disconnect sensor. There's not even any tools is needed actually to replace it. But that's one of the other common problems I have ran into, and most of these problems will cause a check engine light. And the other problem was also kind of related to the fuel system, was the evap purge line. It would trigger a code for the pressure line, and we had to replace the purge line and also the purge valve. That was another part of it. Was actually a bulletin that Volvo put out that we had to replace that as well, and that was another common problem with evap. Now, most of these problems are related to the engine. There's other problems would be related to the SPA platform Volvos, because this engine, they have used it on the older style, body style Volvos, and that's why I wanted to make a video just for this engine. Then in the future, I'm going to make a video just for the SPA platform Volvos, some of the common problems with that particular platform. I believe this is number 7, a common problem. I'm going to put some pictures up here, oil leaks. And what I have noticed with these oil leak problems, the crank sensor, or the crankshaft, the front seal, they used a plastic cover, as you can see in those pictures. They pressed the seal on the cover, and then you take the entire cover off and back on. And when they pressed the seals on, for some reason it wasn't pushed all the way flush, and one side was actually raised. And then when they put the crank pulley that the timing belt rides on, that drives the belt, it was the back of the pulley was rubbing on that seal. And I'm gonna put these video pictures in here to actually look and see where those pulley was rubbing on the seal. Now this particular problem caused damage to the pulley and the seal, and it would end up leaking oil. And we had to remove the timing belt cover, inner and outer covers, and replace that seal to take care of this oil issue. And that was another very, very common problems what we ran into that was causing an oil leak, and that was the seal. And in that case, as I mentioned, we have to replace the seal and replace the pulley as well, and that requires pretty much taking the entire front side of the engine apart, including the VVT, the camshaft pulleys, and the cover that behind the pulley. All that entire cover has to come off in order to get that large plastic housing, let's say, and with that seal as part of it, as comes in one unit. In order to get that off, you have to remove everything off the front of the engine to replace it, that's a very costly to repair. Also, the timing belt would have to be replaced since oil gets on it. You can't reuse it, and that has to be replaced as well. And that was another major problem I've seen on those engines. This particular problem was on the early engines versus later engines. I don't think I've seen any of this problem on 18 or newer for this particular oil leak. Now the other problem, number 8, would be the balance shaft. Those engines, they used 2 balance shafts as one unit, that it was bolted to the bottom of the engine. And those balance shafts used to make noise. And we had to replace those balance shafts, and the oil pan wasn't easy to remove as the older engines. It was a lot of work. It was involved into it, a lot of adjustments needed. And that was another common problem was on the early engines as well. This particular problem was strictly on 15s and 16s. 17s and on did not have the balance shaft problem. So luckily, this is one of the problems got fixed early on with that engine, which is it helped for the long run. That's not an issue that you want it to run into. Just a lot of work involved into it and a lot of tools needed. Most of these repairs always require some special tools, for the exception of maybe the fuel injectors and the fuel pressure sensor. But the rest of them, they all require special tools. And the last problem I'm going to mention here is the PCV box. I don't think this is a particular issue as common with this particular engine. I think it's all Volvo engines that uses this box. They're prone for these boxes to go bad. And when they do, they cause a belt tripping noise. And the noise comes from the crank pulley area, or the harmonic balancer area. And the reason for that, because the breather box will pull so much vacuum, it's trying to pull air from anywhere. And when it starts to pull the air from the crankshaft seal, the front seal, when the air passes by the edge of the seal, it actually makes that noise. And as the engine running, when the noise is happening, if you open the oil cap, the noise go away, because it's pulling the air now from the oil cap versus the crank seal. And for that issue, we just have to replace the breather box on top. And that was a very easy repair. It's not really that big of a deal, but sometimes you run into it. It sounds scary. I have had other shops contact me, and after they replace the vibration dampener, replacing belts and pulleys and everything else, they call me, and then ends up being just a breather box, unfortunately. So this is another problem that it's just annoying, but if you know what you're doing, if you open that cap, it might save you a lot of headache and heartache. So I wanted to bring that up and mention it for you guys to just just to keep that in mind. There was one more issue, but I believe that was a recall on those engines. The coolant had coolant leaks from the coolant bottles and the overflow hoses that it ran behind the firewall, and there were a little bit pain to replace on those engines, especially the one with the supercharger. But those been recalled and been replaced, and the reason they had to recall them because they would leak antifreeze on top of the catalytic converter, and the cat converter had a cover heat shield that it had some type of materials to stop the heat from going past a certain point. And when the antifreeze would leak, it would actually go inside that underneath the metal shield, and then it gets so hot it would actually combust and catch on fire. So that was one of the important things. That's why it was put as a recall, and those pretty much were repaired, and those were specific onto the XC90 2016 that we had to repair. That particular problem was on this four-cylinder engine, but only on the new platform, which is the XC90 in 2016. And I'm pretty sure most of these has been repaired. But if you're not sure if it's been done, if you have a 16 XC90 or an XC60, or not XC60, but just an XC90, if you're not sure, you can always call the dealer with the VIN number. You can get hold of me with the VIN number. I can check it out on my end as well to see if there's any open recalls on that particular VIN for that coolant line. And I think that will be it for this video. Most of these problems are, like I mentioned, they've been repaired, but some of them did carry on, like the fuel injectors and the supercharger. I think most of the things that carried on, but most of the rest of the problem just gotten repaired over the time, just looking at some things and Volvo updating those engines. Now, if you have any questions, you can or if you have any concerns, or if you ran into any of these problems on your Volvo, leave a comment below. And if you have any other questions, I could get back to you. You can check out my Patreon page if you like to talk to me in person. I do email sessions, and also I can do phone sessions as well. Most of my Patreons, if they need a phone call, I do give them a call and talk to them on the phone. And you can get hold of me that way as well. If you just need some information, repair information, I can give you most of this stuff. If you need some expertise, you need me to help you with something, a check engine light or anything like that, just get a hold of me on Patreon. I can get you my email, or we can talk on the phone as well, or text. Thank you guys for watching. I want to say I appreciate all of you guys' support, and thanks for all to my subscribers. If you are not a subscriber, click the subscribe button below and click the bell notification so you get notification when I put out new videos. I appreciate all my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys very much, and have a great day.